Hey everyone, James here. Thank you for checking out the video. So today I want to talk about guitar strings. Now a few weeks ago I put a picture on Instagram and it was a picture of like a goodie bag that the guys from Strings and Things sent over. So Strings and Things handle Ernie Ball in the UK and they're their UK distributor. So big thank you to those guys for sending it over. And what it was, at the time Ernie Ball had just released a few new string gauge sets. There was some like hybrid gauges, some like 0.5 gauges in there. And I got a lot of questions on this post as to how I would use different string gauges. Would it be on like different guitars, different tunings, that kind of thing? So I thought I'd film a video, I'd go through each gauge and I'd say a little piece on how I would use those. And it's how I would use them. It's by no means how you should use them. It's all, string gauge is very subjective. And we've all got our own kind of taste on how we like the guitar to feel, how much resistance or lack of resistance we want when we're playing. So what I want to talk about is creating a consistent feel across multiple different scale lengths and tunings. So with that in mind, my kind of go-to gauge in standard tuning would be these, which are the standard gauge 10s. Actually, the camera can see it there. These are regular Slinkies. So if you are like a 9s guy, if everything I say, if you knock it down a gauge, it'll still remain relevant to you and it'll make everything feel like 9s. Vice versa, if you play 11s, if you add one on, everything will feel like 11s then. So as I said, my standard gauge are these, which are the regular Slinkies. So these are gauge 10s, and that's what I feel most comfortable playing on most guitars in standard tuning. Some guitars I might change, but generally across the board I'll use the gauge 10s. So what I've got here, these are the hybrid Slinkies. You can see I've actually already used this packet. So recently I've used these are 9 to 46s by the way, so these are like the E, B and G are the same as a super Slinky set, so the pink packet, the 9s, and then the D, A and E string are like the 10 gauge, so the regular Slinkies I've just shown. So I've actually just used them on a guitar tuned in F standard, so everything up a semitone. Normally you would go the other way. I think E flat is probably more common, but I've been working with a singer recently and we recorded a song. The song's recorded in E standard, and it's got a lot of like country bluesy licks in with like the open strings, and we've decided that to play it live we want to play it in F, so we've moved it up a semitone. Now I could use a capo, but I've decided I'm going to tune up to F standard. Gives me an excuse to use another guitar on stage, and it also means all the positions are going to stay the same now that everything's basically moved up a fret and pitch. So two things to bear in mind when you're choosing string gauge is the scale length of your guitar. So if you've got shorter scale length it'll feel slinkier, there'll be less tension on the strings. Longer scale length, there'll be more tension, and also what tuning you're in. So if you tune up from E standard, it's going to add tension. If you tune down, it's going to relieve tension. Hence why I use the 9s for tuning up a semitone. So next up, I've got these, which are the power Slinkies. So these are 11 to 48s, and these are my go-to if I'm playing in half step, so E flat. So an awful lot of rock records from, well, still today, but I guess from the 80s onwards. I always associate E flat with Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses because that's the first time I encountered it. But so yeah, 11s are my go-to for playing in E flat. As I mentioned, if you detune your guitar, it's going to relieve string tension, so therefore going up a string gauge is going to compensate for that. So then everything feels the same. E flat with 11s to me feels the same as 10s in standard tuning, so that's why I'm using the power Slinkies for half step. That's quite a common thing. A lot of guitarists will add a gauge if they're dropping a tuning. So next up I've got these, which are the Burley Slinkies. So these are one of the new gauges. These are 11 to 52. So these are like the power Slinkies, but they've got a heavier bottom string. The power Slinkies are 48s. So for these I probably use for half step and then maybe like drop D, so which would in effect be like drop D flat. And that would then, having a thicker string than bottom would stop that lower string going out of tune if you were to hit it harder. So I'd probably use those for drop tunings with a lower E string. Next we've got Primo Slinkies. So these are 9.5 to 44, so these sit in between gauge 9 and 10. So for these I will probably use them, there'll be two applications I might use these. Either if I was using a guitar that's a longer scale length, something like a Strat or a Tele, which is 25.5 inch, as opposed to PRS 24 PRS 25, the custom models. I think they do a 24.5, which will be a shorter scale length, similar to a Les Paul, which is 24.75. So these I would probably use on a longer scale length, so like a Strat or a Telly, or I might use them again on a guitar that I'm tuning up a semitone, just to kind of, as they're a thinner gauge than the 10s by I guess 0.5 of a gauge, on that longer scale length it's going to relieve some tension, same as if I'm tuning up, to compensate for the added tension from tuning up. The lighter gauge will make up for that. So now I've got the Mega Slinkies. So these are the same as the Primo Slinkies, but in between 10 and 11. So these I might use the other way around. So if I was either going to half step, or I might use them on a shorter scale length guitar to make them feel more like the longer scale length. Generally I prefer 25.5. I prefer the resistance on them with 10s than I do shorter scale length. I also feel like there's a bit more room on the higher frets, but again, that's all preference. So I might use these on like a Les Paul, or as I mentioned, like one of the PRS, I think it's the PRS 245 that they have that is 24.5 inch scale. I don't actually own one, but hypothetically, if I did, I might use 10.5s on that. Or like I say, if I was going down half a step. So lastly, out of the new gauges, I've got these, which are the Mammoth Slinkies. So I've not actually been brave enough to try these yet. These are 12 to 62. So for me, if I was to play these and feel comfortable, I'd have to go down to something like C# standard, which is quite a common thing to do. So that'd be dropping at 3 semitones. My hands aren't built for playing 12s in standard tuning. I've got quite little hands really for a guitarist. So I'm considering either C# standard, or I might use these on acoustic as well. Acoustic strings you tend to use heavier strings on, depending on what you're tracking. So with that said, that leads me on to these, which are the Earthwood Lights. So these are the acoustic strings that I use. These are gauge 11 to 52, so they're actually lighter than those Mammoth Slinkies. The reason I prefer a lighter gauge on acoustic, still one up from the electric, but light for acoustics in general, is that a lot of the acoustic I play is bluegrass, which is all quite lead focused. There's a lot of what's called flat picking and cross picking involved, which can be it's fairly demanding as far as acoustic playing goes. If I was doing like big strummed kind of things, I would probably use the gauge 12s, maybe even the Mammoth Slinkies. So that's the acoustic strings I'm using. So hopefully that's made some kind of sense and given some kind of insight as to how I would choose a string gauge based on scale length and tuning. Again, those are the two factors that will influence your string tension, is scale length and tuning. So just to recap, longer scale length is more tension, shorter, less tension. The higher that you tune up, more tension, lower that you tune, less tension. If you've got any questions, please let me know in the comment section, and if you enjoyed the video, please do click like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.